Here is a very interesting topic that we have decided to bring on board. Bank Bazaar has released their Aspiration Index for 2019. This is the second Aspiration Index that they have received after 2018. And this time around, instead of just simply taking millennials, they have decided to bring on board young working professionals, roughly in the age gap of between 22 years old, who have just right now got their job, to all the way to 45 years old, who may be well in an advanced level of their jobs, and of course maybe having their own families. And there are some very interesting findings, some of them good for their financial health, some not so. So let's discuss the findings then and the spending trends of the young working professionals with Aparna Mahesh of Bank Bazaar. Aparna, thank you then for joining in on the Money Show. Let's first start off by talking about some of the most interesting findings of this report.
Sure. So before I, thank you for having us on the show. Before I get into the findings, it's important that I emphasize what this index actually entails. So it's a comprehensive index. I think you've covered the audience and you know who we took the study to. But this study basically covers 3 facets of aspirations, which is the importance of a life goal, their confidence with regards to how confident they think they are in terms of being able to achieve it, and their current state of readiness. So it's a little bit about their dreams. Do they believe it will become a reality, and where do things stand today? So that's really the 3 pillars of the Aspiration Index. So with that in mind, there were some very, very interesting things that came to the fore. I'm going to give you the top 5 findings, and of course, the entire report is available on our site. Overall Aspiration Index for India is very high. It's at about 86.9. That's an index. What does that mean? You get to that sort of a number when clearly people have high aspirations. They somewhere are confident in their ability to achieve those life goals. And they also believe that today, as things stand where they are, their current state of readiness allows them to believe that these life goals are within their reach. So 86.9, it's a very, very healthy score for as far as India's aspirations go. Point number 2, very interesting, because last year when we did the first version of the Aspiration Index, wealth was by far the winner, right? It was a clear first. This year, it's actually health. Health is super important, followed by relationships and wealth, which come in, closely behind. So that's an important trend, change in the trend that we saw. The third thing, again, very important, but I'm sure it doesn't come as a surprise to anyone, is the fact that non-metros have just about edged out the metros when it comes to the Aspiration Index. So they have a slightly higher Aspiration Index. This was not what we saw last year. In fact, the 2 top cities that have emerged out of the 12 cities that we've taken the study to are Bhubaneswar and Indore. And Hyderabad is also tied at number 2. So non-metros, very, very important. The interesting thing in terms of regions is that East India, which includes cities like Kolkata and Bhubaneswar, seems to be higher on the Aspiration Index. For South, the West, and then finally the North. Last year, South was on top. Coming to women, very, very interesting. So women are almost on par with men when it comes to the Aspiration Index. But the interesting thing is that they show extremes. So when you're looking at women in the age groups of 35 to 45, their Aspiration Index is significantly higher than the overall score for males. And if you look at the younger women who just entered the workforce in the age group of 22 to 27, it's significantly lower. And that's where I think overall at an average level, women tend to be a little lower than men. But this is the kind of shift that we see. I think what we are also seeing is as people age, their Aspiration Index seems to be improving or increasing. So, you briefly touched upon the 3 groups. We've named them the early jobbers, the money mooners. These are the guys who are in the age group of 28 to 35. They really...
Aparna, you've already given me some very interesting findings, and I want to take them one by one. I'm very happy to know that young professionals are focusing on their health. So that's, I think, a big positive, because health is wealth, and what's the point of earning all that money if you're not going to keep healthy? So that's very important, and I'm happy to know that our young working professionals are putting that right at the top. But you briefly alluded to savings, and the finding was that the younger the working professional is, the more they tend to save, almost 40% of their income, whereas a 35 to 45-year-old is able to save only 37%. But do you think that this has more to do with the fact that when you're 35 and 45, your responsibilities obviously are higher, and hence you are not able to save as much as perhaps you would like to? Or is it simply because their attitude towards saving changes, and hence they perhaps save a little lesser?
No, I think I'd agree with your hypothesis, which is, for instance, education comes up top as a significant chunk of expenses for the money mooners as well as the wealth warriors. So as you rightly said, as you get older, there are more commitments. Your family is there. The kind of the avenues or your ability to save obviously goes down. But that said, I'm going to quickly touch upon the fact that what we've noticed across the study is that the debt seems to be well under control for all of these groups. While the savings are definitely high, what we're seeing is that a significant chunk of the population, more than 80% of them, are only spending about 30% of their income servicing their debt. So that's broadly the trends that we're seeing when it comes to savings as well as debt.
And I'm particularly pleased to know that as well, despite the easy availability of debt, via various online channels, P2P lending, and you get a loan even if your credit score is not that great. Still, it's interesting to know that only 80%, almost 80%, that's a major chunk, spend less than 1/3 of their annual income, on EMI. So does that mean that, your new working age professional is not very willing to take on debt? Whereas, of course, globally, the trend is very simple, student loans, home loans, you're just practically living off your future income. So do you believe that that concept of as much as possible staying away from debt is still very much imbibed in your young working professional?
I wouldn't quite put it that way, because what we've seen is that 93% of this population that we've reached out to have some form of debt or the other. You can also, I think, there definitely is they're splurging, they want to buy things, but at the same time, there seems to be an element of prudence that we are noticing across all the age groups, where doing things the smart way seems to be more important than going all out. So they definitely are not going to break the bank for purchases that they may want to have, or any of their, the dream car, etc. But I don't think they're shying away from debt. No, that's not the reading that we would get from this study.
Still not completely shying away from debt, as per the Bank Bazaar Aspirational Index. Another point I want to bring forward is consumerism. You mentioned the Aspirational Index is increasing as the person ages. Do you think that, to put it very bluntly, do you think that us young working professionals are spendthrifts, basically, Aparna?
So it's an interesting one. There's a bit of a dichotomy here. What we are seeing is, in professionals under the age of 35, image is a very important thing, right? Especially for the early jobbers, it's right up top. Now, when you're talking about image, it includes things like always being up to date with gadgets, fashion, or having a premium car, right? So that clearly is important for them. But at the other side, what we're also seeing is that buying the most expensive thing is not necessarily what they're after. So it's not blind consumerism, and that it's a smarter way of attaining some of the things that they hold important and believe are important for them. So I would say consumerism is alive. It's thriving, but I think there's a good measure of prudence that's been thrown in as well.
Okay. Aparna, the other very interesting point is with respect to retirement. Obviously, the older you get, the more keenly will you be planning for your retirement. But I read your report, and it mentions that most of them have started planning for their retirement at the age of 29. That's a very high level of responsibility kicking in at that age, Aparna.
That's true. I definitely want to add a caveat there. I think a lot of them start saving actively at the age of 28 to 29. But retirement is not necessarily something that the early jobbers are very obsessed with. But what we are seeing is once a person is in his 30s, right? He's very actively thinking about retirement. So that definitely comes into mind when you're looking at people who move into, as I said, the 30s, the money mooners and the wealth warriors that we have in our study.
Okay, all right. And Aparna, finally, it's also interesting to note that they have their corpus as well ready, 1 to 2 crore rupees. However, I must ask you, do you think that they are undermining the amount that they will need when they retire?
Probably. I have no doubts about that. I think, this is a bit of a guesstimate. Bear in mind, most of these people, I mean, the audience is under the age of 45, 44. A bulk of them are under the age of 35. And so this is probably a guesstimate that they have in their minds, in terms of what is it that they would need to save before they can think about hanging up their boots.
Okay, in fact, speaking of retirement, we have a very special show as well planned tomorrow. We are going to be talking about early retirement. And in fact, we have one gentleman with us who has retired early. So we are going to get to know how he did so. But on that note, thanks Aparna for joining in and sharing with us what are the key findings then of the all-important Bank Bazaar Aspirational Index, essentially talking about the spending, saving habits and also the financial planning habits of young working professionals between the age of 22 to 45.